The moving truck pulled into my driveway at 6:47 in the evening. I remember the exact time because I had just stepped onto my front porch with a glass of lemonade, proud as I had ever been in my life, watching the last of my guests arrive for the housewarming party I had spent 3 weeks planning. The sun was going down behind the oak trees in the yard. The house was lit up from inside. Music was playing. Everything smelled like grilled food and fresh paint and new beginnings. Then I saw it. Before we jump into today's incredible story, hit the like button and please comment your country below. I'm curious to see how many countries are here today. Now let's continue. A big white moving truck rumbling up my street, slow and deliberate, like it already knew where it was going. Right behind it, a silver SUV I recognized immediately, my mother-in-law's car. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up to why. I turned to my wife, Emily, who was standing right beside me in the yellow dress I told her looked beautiful that morning. She was already smiling. Not the nervous kind of smile. Not the apologetic kind. The kind of smile that told me she had been holding something back for a long time and had decided tonight was the night to let it go. "Baby," she said, not even looking at me. So, I may have forgotten to mention something. The truck stopped. The SUV stopped. Both doors swung open, and out stepped Gerald and Patricia Harmon, my in-laws, stretching their arms like people who had just arrived somewhere they planned to stay for a very long time. My name is Eric Jackson. I am 36 years old. I worked for 11 years to buy this house. And in the next 60 seconds, I would learn that my wife had made a decision about my home, our home, without ever saying a single word to me. This is the story of what happened next. A man builds more than a house. He builds a life. And the only thing worse than someone trying to take that life is realizing the person who let them in was sleeping next to you the whole time. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story does not make sense if you do not understand what this house meant to me. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in the south side of Atlanta with my mother, Diane, and my younger brother, Jacob. My father, Raymond Jackson, left when I was 9 years old. Not a dramatic exit. No screaming, no slamming doors. He was just there one morning and gone by afternoon, like a season changing without warning. My mother never cried in front of us. She just tightened her budget, picked up a second shift at the hospital where she worked as a nursing aide, and made sure we had what we needed. She was one of the strongest people I have ever known, and I spent my entire childhood watching her pour herself out for a home she would never own. That was the thing that stayed with me. We always rented, always at someone else's mercy. A landlord could raise the price, and we moved. The building could change hands, and we adjusted. My mother never complained, but I saw the quiet sadness in her eyes every time she had to explain to a neighbor why we were packing boxes again. I told myself when I was 12 years old, sitting on a fire escape eating cereal for dinner because we had not gotten to the grocery store yet, that one day I would own something. Something that nobody could take away. Something with my name on a deed. I went to Georgia State on a partial scholarship and paid the rest working nights at a hotel front desk. I got my degree in construction management, spent 2 years learning the industry from the bottom up at a contracting firm, then moved into project management. By the time I was 28, I was overseeing commercial builds worth millions of dollars. I was not rich, but I was deliberate. I saved aggressively, lived below my means, and kept my eye on that one goal. I met Emily Harmon at a cookout in 2018, my coworker Willie's backyard, 4th of July, somebody's cousin's playlist making the whole block feel like a party. She was laughing at something her friend said when I first noticed her. A big, easy laugh. Confident. Beautiful. She had natural hair pinned up with a clip that kept almost falling out, and every few minutes she would push it back without breaking the conversation. I thought that was the most graceful thing I had ever seen. We talked for 3 hours that night. About Atlanta. About our families. About what we wanted. She told me she was a school counselor, that she loved her work, but the system frustrated her, that she was saving money to eventually open her own practice. I told her about my dream of owning a house, a real house, with a yard, in a neighborhood where kids could play outside. She smiled at that and said her grandmother used to say a house was the only kind of love that could not walk out the door. We were married 2 years later, June 2020. Small ceremony because of the world situation at the time, but beautiful because Emily has a gift for making small things feel significant. My mother was there. My brother Jacob. Her parents, Gerald and Patricia, who I knew from a handful of dinners and holiday visits. They were a particular type of people, the kind who say the right things in polite company, but let you feel the weight of their opinions the moment you step out of eyeshot. Gerald worked in insurance. Patricia was a retired office manager. They were not unkind, exactly, but they had a way of measuring everything, including me. Patricia once said, during Christmas dinner in our second year of marriage, that she hoped I was doing well enough to take care of her daughter properly. Gerald had laughed and said she was just being a mother. Emily had changed the subject. I had swallowed it and smiled, the way you do when you decide the relationship is worth more than the argument. I put down the earnest money on the house on Fairview Lane in February, 3 months before the housewarming. For bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a covered back porch, a garage, and a backyard big enough to grow something in. The neighborhood was quiet. Good schools nearby. Mature trees lining the street. The moment I walked through the front door on the showing, I felt something settle in my chest. A stillness I had been chasing since I was 12 years old on that fire escape. Emily loved it too. Or at least, that is what I believed. She walked through every room with her hand trailing along the walls, like she was reading the house through her fingertips. She stood in the kitchen and said she could already picture Sunday mornings in here. She went out on the back porch and smiled at the yard. I stood behind her and put my hands on her shoulders and thought, this is it. This is what I built toward. We closed in March. I painted the living room myself, a warm gray that Emily picked out. We argued, lovingly, about the kitchen hardware. We spent a Saturday building the bed frame together and laughed until our sides hurt when Jacob's instructions turned out to be in the wrong order. My mother came over and walked through every room with her hand over her mouth, and then she grabbed my face with both hands and said, "Baby, I am so proud of you." I cried a little. I am not ashamed of that. The housewarming party was scheduled for a Saturday in May. I sent invitations 3 weeks in advance. I planned the menu, arranged the coolers, strung lights on the back porch, cleaned the garage, and set up seating in the backyard. I told Emily it was our moment, a celebration of what we had built together. She helped me pick the playlist and made her grandmother's potato salad. Everything felt right. The week before the party, Emily seemed a little distracted. I noticed her texting more than usual, stepping out of the room for phone calls. I asked once if everything was okay. She said she was just coordinating with her friend Keisha about the party. I believed her. I should have asked more questions. I should have trusted the feeling in the back of my mind that kept whispering that something was slightly off. But I was in love, and when you love someone, you are always a little slower to investigate what love might be hiding. The day of the party arrived. 61 people showed up. Neighbors, co-workers, college friends. My mother sat in the best chair in the backyard and held court like the queen she is. Jacob burned the first round of wings and blamed the grill. People were laughing. The house was full of noise and warmth. And then, at 6:47 in the evening, the moving truck turned onto Fairview Lane. I watched it come down the street, and the lemonade in my hand went cold without getting any colder. Because somewhere inside me, in that place where a man keeps the truths he does not want to look at yet, I already knew. I turned to my wife, and she was already smiling. There are lies people tell you to protect themselves, and then there are the ones they tell you to protect everyone else except you. Emily. I kept my voice level. The music was still going inside. People were still laughing. My hand tightened around the lemonade glass. What is that truck doing here? She turned to face me then, and something in her expression shifted. Not guilt, exactly, but the particular look of someone who has rehearsed a conversation so many times that they have convinced themselves it will go smoothly. Okay, so, Mama and Daddy have been going through some things financially. Their landlords sold the building. They had 60 days, and they couldn't find anything in their budget in time. I stared at her. Emily, I know. She held up one hand. I know I should have talked to you first. How long have you known? She paused. That pause was its own answer. About 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She had known for 6 weeks while I was painting guest rooms, assembling furniture, and planning a party I believed we were hosting to celebrate our home. For 6 weeks, she had let me do all of that without once saying, "Eric, my parents are moving in." The truck had parked. Gerald was directing a young man I did not recognize to start unloading boxes. Patricia was already walking toward the front porch, pulling her rolling bag like this was a hotel, and she had a reservation. Emily. I stepped closer and lowered my voice because I was aware that my guests were 20 feet away and I was not about to become a spectacle at my own party. You cannot be serious right now. They are my parents, Eric. This is my house. It is our house. Then why did you not talk to me about a decision for our house? She folded her arms, and something I had never quite seen before moved across her face, a kind of practiced patience, like she had already decided I would be difficult about this, already decided what she thought of my reaction before it even happened. I knew you would say no, and I couldn't do that to them. I looked at her for a long moment, at the woman I had married, at the woman who had stood beside me in that kitchen and talked about Sunday mornings, at the woman who knew, better than anyone, what this house represented to me and why it mattered. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw something that frightened me more than anger could. I saw someone who had made a decision without me and felt completely comfortable with that. Baby, she said, softer now, reaching for my arm. Just, let's get through tonight. We will figure it out. They won't be here long. And because my guests were watching, and because my mother was 30 feet away and I did not want her to see her son fall apart at his own party, and because I loved Emily and I still believed, foolishly, I would later understand, that this could be fixed, I let go of the conversation. I walked back into the party. I smiled. I laughed. I grilled another round of wings with Jacob. I took pictures with my neighbors. I watched Patricia Harmon set her rolling bag down in what I had designed as the guest room and begin opening drawers like she was checking into a long stay. I watched Gerald sit down in my armchair in the living room, kick his feet up on my new coffee table, and reach for the remote control. Nobody at the party knew what I was feeling. That was the performance of the night. But my mother knew. She always knows. She found me alone in the kitchen around 9 o'clock, refilling the ice bucket, and she leaned against the counter beside me and said very quietly, "What happened?" I told her, quickly, in low words, while the party buzzed behind us. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." She nodded slowly. "You built this house on truth, Eric. Don't let it get rerouted by somebody else's convenience." She squeezed my hand and went back out to the yard. I stood there alone in my kitchen, the kitchen where Emily had talked about Sunday mornings, and I thought about what truth actually looked like when you got to the other side of a beautiful lie. The party ended around 11. Guests left. The backyard quieted down. Jacob helped me fold up the chairs, gave me a long look that said he already understood more than I had told him, and said he would call me tomorrow. Gerald had fallen asleep in my armchair. Patricia was in the guest room. Emily was loading the dishwasher when I came inside. We did not argue that night. I was too tired, and she seemed to be daring me to. That slightly raised chin, waiting to see if I would start something. So I did not. I went to bed. I lay in the dark in the house I had worked 11 years for, listening to the sound of someone I did not invite snoring in my living room. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, and I began to think very carefully. When someone hides something from you for 6 weeks, the hiding is not an accident. It is a choice, made every single morning. In the days after the party, I did not explode. That surprised Emily, I could tell. She kept watching me out of the corner of her eye, waiting for the confrontation, the raised voice, the ultimatum, the dramatic stand that would either give her something to deflect or give her parents ammunition to call me unreasonable. But I had grown up watching my mother handle impossible situations with discipline and quiet strategy, and I had learned something important from her. Do not give people your emotional reaction before you have your full picture. Anger without information is just noise. What I needed was clarity. So I went quiet, and I watched. I started by counting what I actually knew. Gerald and Patricia Harmon were now living in my home. They occupied the second largest bedroom, the one I had spent 2 evenings painting a calm, soft blue and outfitted with a queen bed and a dresser because I had imagined hosting family visits, not permanent residents. I had picked that room carefully. I had imagined my mother staying in it when she came to visit. I had imagined Jacob crashing there on long holiday weekends. Now it had someone else's shoes by the door and someone else's reading glasses on the nightstand. Their furniture was in my garage, packed in somewhere between my tools and the lawnmower, because Emily had said, just temporarily, and I had not yet done the work of figuring out what that word meant when she used it. Gerald had already developed a habit of leaving the television on all night. The sound came through the hallway, muffled enough that I could not make out words, but present enough that I could feel it. A low electronic hum that reminded me, every time I woke at 2 in the morning, that my house was no longer just mine. And then there were the cabinets. Patricia rearranged my kitchen cabinets on the second day. I came down Monday morning in the half-awake fog of 6 o'clock and reached for my mug. The wide ceramic one with the handle that fit my hand exactly right. The one Jacob had given me for my birthday 3 years ago. And it was not there. The cabinet where I kept my mugs was now holding plates. The plates were somewhere else. The mugs were in the cabinet above the stove, which made no sense to me at all, because reaching above the stove while the burner is going is how people get burned. When I asked, Patricia said brightly, "Oh, I reorganized things. It flows better this way." She smiled like she had done me a favor. I said, "Okay." And I wrote it down. That is when I started keeping notes. Not to be cold or calculating. I want to be clear about that. I was not cold. I was heartbroken, which is an entirely different temperature from cold. Heartbreak is hot and slow and sits directly behind the sternum. But I needed to see the pattern clearly, because I knew that what I was feeling and what was actually happening needed to be kept in separate columns if I was going to navigate this without losing myself. Day 3. Gerald asked me for the Wi-Fi password and then, 20 minutes later, told me the internet was slow and that I should really look into upgrading our plan. He said it the way someone says it when they believe they are being helpful. He looked at me as though I should thank him for the suggestion. Day 5. Patricia told Emily, not me, Emily, that the spare bathroom needed new towels because the ones we had were too thin. Emily drove to the store that weekend and bought a full new set. Fluffy, expensive ones. She did not mention it to me until I noticed the receipt on the counter. When I raised an eyebrow, she said, "Mama likes nice towels." I let it go, but I wrote it down. Day 7 was the one that truly tested me. I came home from the job site at 6:30 in the evening. One of those days that starts before the sun comes up and ends in the particular exhaustion that lives in your shoulders and the back of your knees. All I wanted was quiet. Quiet, a hot meal, and the company of the woman I married. I pulled into my driveway, walked through the front door, and stopped. 2 men I had never seen before in my life were sitting in my living room watching the game. One of them was in my armchair. The other had his feet up on my coffee table. My coffee table, the one Emily and I had driven 40 minutes to find at an estate sale because she said it had character. Gerald was between them with a bowl of chips, laughing at something on the screen. Patricia was in the kitchen, cooking a full meal for all 5 of us, humming to herself. The house smelled like someone else's Sunday. I stood in my doorway holding my work bag and looked at the scene in front of me for a long moment. Nobody turned around. Nobody introduced me to the strangers in my home. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, our bed, the one Jacob had helped me put together wrong and then put back together right, laughing the whole time, and I put my hands on my knees and I breathed. Emily came in about 20 minutes later. She stood in the doorway like she was testing the temperature of the room before she entered it. "They're almost done," she said carefully. "Daddy's friends from church. They stopped by. Did you know they were coming?" A pause. Too short to be sure, too long to be nothing. "Daddy mentioned they might. And you didn't tell me." It just didn't seem like a big deal. I looked at her. "Emily, there are strangers in our home that I have never met, sitting on our furniture when I walk in from work." She came and sat beside me on the bed. Her hand found my knee. "I know. I'm sorry. I should have told you. I'll ask Daddy to give us more notice next time." Next time. Already assuming there would be a next time. "Can we please talk about what is actually happening here?" I said. "Eric, not the church friends. The whole thing. Your parents. The plan. The timeline. All of it." She pulled her hand back. "I told you, they needed help. The landlords sold their building. They had nowhere to go. They had 60 days, you said. It wasn't enough time. Emily." I turned and looked at her directly. "I just need you to sit with me for 10 minutes and be honest. Not managed. Not softened. Just honest. Can we do that?" She was quiet for a moment. And then that familiar shift happened. The slight closing off. The decision that the conversation was going somewhere she did not want it to go. The retreat into the version of things she had already rehearsed. "I think you're making this a lot bigger than it has to be," she said. She stood up. She went back downstairs. I sat on the bed alone in the room that was supposed to be my sanctuary, in the house that was supposed to be my proof, and I thought about the woman at the cookout who said a house was love that could not walk out the door. And I thought, but what about the people who walk through the door uninvited? I called my brother Jacob the next morning during my commute. I laid it out from start to finish. The truck, the 6 weeks of silence, the cabinets, Patricia's towels, the strangers on the couch. He listened the whole way through without a single interruption, which was his particular way of showing you that you had his complete attention. When I finished, he said, "Eric, I love Emily. You know I do. But what she did was not right." "I know. What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet. That's the problem. I can't see it clearly enough when I'm inside it." "Then you need to talk to someone who can see it from outside," he said. "Not just me. Somebody who's done this before." That evening, I called Aunt Vera. She is my father's sister, the one member of that side of the family who never disappeared. She is 62 years old and sharp in the way that only comes from living through a great deal. She spent 30 years as a family mediator, not counseling, exactly, but the work of sitting between people who loved each other and could no longer see each other clearly. She raised 4 children after losing her husband to a heart attack when the youngest was 3. If anyone in my life had the combination of love and objectivity I needed, it was Aunt Vera. She let me talk for 20 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked questions, unhurried, precise, the kind that stripped away the surface to show you the shape beneath. Had there been other moments when Emily had made significant decisions without me? How had she related to her parents in the time I had known her? When her parents called, what happened in the room? I sat with those questions for a long time after we hung up. And when I started answering them honestly, not the way I wanted to answer them, but the way they actually needed to be answered, I did not like what I found. You do not fall out of love all at once. You fall out of it one unanswered question at a time. Here is what I found when I looked back honestly. Emily was a good woman in many ways. She was warm with people. She was dedicated to her students. She remembered things that mattered. Birthdays, the names of your siblings, the thing you mentioned once in passing about your favorite food. She had a generous spirit, and in the first 2 years of our marriage, that generosity had felt like shelter. But there was a pattern I had been explaining away for years. Emily's parents had always occupied a significant amount of our emotional space. Not always visibly, but like background noise that you stop noticing until the power goes out, and the silence makes you realize how loud it actually was. Early in our marriage, we had planned a trip to New Orleans for our first anniversary. I had been saving for it, had the hotel booked. 3 days before we were supposed to leave, Patricia called Emily saying she was not feeling well and did not want to be alone. We canceled the trip. Emily said her mother needed her. I rebooked it for a month later. Patricia was fine within 2 days. The second time it stood out clearly was when we were deciding which neighborhood to buy in. I had narrowed it down to 2 areas, Fairview, where we ended up, and a neighborhood called Briarcliff Heights, which I honestly preferred because it was closer to my job and had a slightly larger yard. Emily had lobbied hard for Fairview without fully saying why. It was only 3 months into living there that I mentioned to a neighbor that I had almost bought in Briarcliff Heights. The neighbor raised an eyebrow. Isn't that about 40 minutes from her parents? Emily had never mentioned that once in our entire conversation about the 2 houses. Fairview Lane was 12 minutes from Gerald and Patricia. When I brought this up to Aunt Vera, she said quietly, "Eric." She was already thinking about this. The full weight of that sentence settled on me slowly, the way cold does. Not sharp, but deep. She was planning for her parents before she told you, Vera said. And the fact that she picked the house closest to them and still didn't tell you what she was thinking, that's not forgetfulness. That is a habit of leaving you out of important things. I drove home that evening in complete silence. The radio was off. I needed to be alone with what I was seeing clearly for what felt like the first time. When I walked in, the living room was full, Gerald on my armchair, Patricia crocheting on the sofa, Emily at the kitchen table on her laptop with a glass of wine. It looked like a family scene, a comfortable one. The only person in the room who did not look settled was me, standing in my own doorway, still in my work clothes, holding my keys. Emily looked up and smiled. "Hey babe, you hungry?" "Mama made smothered chicken." Patricia said, "There's plenty, Eric. Come sit down." Gerald said nothing. He was watching the game. I stood there for a moment, looking at all of it, the warmth, the ease, the way the room had arranged itself around people who had not asked my permission to be there. And I felt something I had been trying not to feel for almost 2 weeks. I felt like a guest in my own home. I said, "I'm good." I ate on the way. I went upstairs. I heard Emily say something to her mother in a low voice. I did not catch the words, but I heard Patricia laugh lightly in response. A small, knowing sound. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands clasped between my knees and thought about what Aunt Vera had said. She was planning for her parents before she told you. And then I thought about something else she had said, right at the end of our call, almost as an afterthought. Baby, she had said, before you make any moves, you might want to know exactly what's in that deed. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney. The most powerful thing a prepared man can do is wait until his preparation is complete before he acts. My attorney's name is Clifford James, a tall, deliberate man with reading glasses he was always setting down in the wrong place, who had handled my real estate closing 18 months earlier and who I trusted because he was the rare kind of lawyer who told you what you needed to hear rather than what made the billable hours longer. I reached him on a Thursday afternoon during my lunch break, sitting in my truck with the engine off and the windows cracked. I told him the situation in clean, professional terms. No emotion, just the facts. My in-laws had moved into my home without my knowledge or consent. My wife had facilitated it. They were currently occupying the property as though they lived there permanently, and I needed to understand exactly what my legal standing was. He said, "Let me pull your file, and I'll call you in the morning." He called at 7:45. "Eric," he said, "I want to make sure you're sitting down." I was in my car, parked outside the job site, coffee cooling in the cup holder. "I'm sitting, Clifford. The house on Fairview Lane is titled solely in your name." I had known this. In the abstract way, you know, a fact you filed away and did not think much about. The reason it had been structured that way was practical. Emily had a medical debt on her credit history from 3 years before we met, an old emergency room bill that had gone to collections and not fully cleared. Our mortgage broker had said keeping her name off the title would give us a significantly better interest rate. Emily had agreed without hesitation. We had signed the paperwork and moved on. I had told myself we would add her name to the deed later once her credit was fully rebuilt. We had never gotten around to it. "So Emily is not on the deed," I said. "Correct. And Gerald and Patricia Harmon are not on any documentation related to the property whatsoever. No lease, no rental agreement, no formal acknowledgement of tenancy. As of this moment, they are occupying your home as informal guests, guests who have no legal standing as residents." The quiet that followed that sentence was a particular kind of quiet, the kind that comes when you understand something you cannot ununderstand. "What would it take to have them removed?" I asked. "Legally, step by step." "I want to be careful here," Clifford said, "because marriage complicates things and I want you to have the full picture before you make any decisions. Under marital property law in this state, assets acquired during the marriage can be subject to equitable distribution in a divorce proceeding. But we're not there yet, and that is a different conversation for a different day." He paused. "What I can tell you is that if you wanted Gerald and Patricia out of your home, you would serve them a formal notice to vacate. They would have 30 days to leave. If they did not leave, we file for unlawful occupancy. You are well within your rights. Your legal position is genuinely strong. Stronger than they probably think," I said. "Considerably," he said. "People who move in uninvited tend to assume the situation gives them more power than it actually does." I sat in my truck for a long time after we hung up. Not because I needed to think about the information, I had heard it clearly, but because receiving it meant I had passed some invisible threshold. I had gone from a husband dealing with a difficult situation to a man who had consulted an attorney about his own household. The distance between those two things felt significant. I had not decided what I was going to do with any of it yet. I want to be clear about that. I was not a man constructing revenge like a building plan, laying out each piece with precision and cold satisfaction. I was a man who loved his wife, was hurt by his wife, and needed to understand the shape of the ground he was standing on before he took another step. That is not calculation. That is survival. But knowing the shape of a thing matters. It matters more than people give it credit for. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. Patricia was out, at a neighbor's, Emily had mentioned. Gerald was in the garage, moving boxes around, the sounds of it coming through the interior door. Emily was at the kitchen table with a stack of student work beside her and a red pen in her hand, still in her work clothes, her shoes on the floor beside her chair. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment before she heard me come in. The way she turned a page and made a quick notation. The way she tucked the pen behind her ear while she thought. The way a small furrow appeared in her brow when a paper gave her trouble. I had loved those details so much for so long that they had become part of the furniture of my daily life. Things I stopped noticing the way you stop noticing the color of your own walls. I noticed them now. with the particular sharpness of something you know you might be losing. She looked up. Hey, you're early. Yeah. I sat down across from her. I need us to talk. A real conversation. She set the pen down. Okay. Not the kind where you manage what I hear, I said. Not the version that's been prearranged so I land in a particular place. A real one, Emily, where you actually tell me what's going on. Something moved across her face. Not guilt. She was past the easy guilt of early discovery. Something more like preparation. I don't manage you, she said. How long ago did your parents find out about the building being sold? She was still for a beat. I told you, about 6 weeks before the party. Emily. I kept my voice level. I need the real number. The beat stretched. About 2 months. 2 months. 8 weeks. 50-some-odd mornings where she had woken up beside me, eaten breakfast with me, talked with me about the house and the party and the future, and held that information carefully behind everything she said. That was not a slip. That was a decision made daily. Why? I asked. Just tell me why. Because I was scared. Her voice was quiet now, stripped of the management. I knew if I told you, you'd say no, and I'd be caught between you and them, and I didn't know how to do that. So your solution was to take the choice out of my hands. She looked at the table. I know how it sounds. Do you understand what that actually did to me? You let me paint this house. You let me plan this party. You stood next to me on that porch and let me feel proud of what we'd built. My voice almost caught. I steadied it. And you were carrying this the whole time. You looked me in the face every morning and you didn't tell me. Eric, that's not a mistake, Emily. Mistakes are things that happen once. You made a choice 60 days in a row. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, something in her was softer, more unguarded. They're my parents, she said. I know you don't have. I mean, you grew up differently, and I know your dad wasn't. She stopped herself. But it was already in the air. I felt it land. My father, who had left. The implication, unfinished but complete, that maybe I simply lacked the capacity to understand what it meant to love a parent the way she loved hers. It was the kind of thing that was true enough to sting and unfair enough to be used as a shield. I sat with the sting for a moment. Then I set it aside. What I didn't have, I said carefully, was a father who stayed. That is absolutely true. What I did have was a mother who worked 2 jobs and still sat us down every time she had to make a decision that affected our family. We were kids. We didn't always understand. But she put us in the room because she believed we deserved to know. I looked at my wife. I am your husband. I deserve to be in the room. Emily's chin dropped. I could see her fighting with something inside herself. The version of her that wanted to defend and the version that was beginning to understand what she had actually done. So what do you want me to do? She asked, very quietly. Right now? Tell me the truth about one more thing. I leaned forward. How long are they planning to stay? The pause that followed was long enough to be its own answer. Emily, Daddy mentioned. She exhaled. Maybe a year. Until they find something in their budget. A year. Not a few weeks. Not a bridge. A full year. In my house. In my space. In the life I had spent 11 years engineering precisely because I wanted to control it. I nodded slowly, calmly, in the way of a man who has heard a thing he suspected and is now confirming the cost of knowing it. I stood up. I went upstairs without another word. And I called Jacob. I need you to meet me this weekend, I said. Clear your Saturday morning and bring your head, not your feelings. The right conversation with the right person at the right time can change the entire direction of a life. Jacob met me Saturday morning at a coffee shop on the east side of town. He came in with his jacket unzipped, ordered the largest drink on the menu, and sat down across from me like a man prepared for something serious. He had always been that way, younger than me by 4 years, but wise in a different direction. Where I thought in structures and plans, Jacob thought in people. He read rooms the way other people read books. He had worked in human resources for 8 years, and he had a gift for seeing the dynamics underneath what people said out loud. I told him everything, including the deed, including the 2 months, including what Emily had said about choosing between me and her parents. He listened the way he always did, completely still, coffee cup untouched, eyes steady. When I finished, he said, Eric, I want to say something, and I need you to hear it without getting defensive. Go ahead. I don't think Emily is a bad person. Neither do I. But I think, he said carefully, that she has been raised in a family where her needs were the center of every conversation. Not in a spoiled way. In a, required way. Like, her parents built their world around Patricia's feelings and Gerald's comfort. And Emily grew up learning that the right way to handle hard things was to manage them quietly until they were done and then present them as finished. I looked at him. Say that again. She didn't ask you because she was not raised to ask. She was raised to decide and then smooth things over after. That's how her parents operated. That's what she learned love looked like. I sat back in my chair and stared at the table. Because that was exactly what I had watched Patricia and Gerald do. Patricia rearranged my cabinets without asking and called it helping. Gerald invited people to my home without permission and called it being social. They did not ask. They acted and then expected adjustment. And Emily had learned that from them. For 33 years. That doesn't make it okay, I said. No, Jacob agreed. It does not. But it tells you what you're actually dealing with. This is not just about the house. This is about whether Emily is willing to do the work to be someone different in your marriage than she was in her parents' home. We sat with that for a while. What would you do? I asked. He picked up his coffee. Honestly, I would give her one real chance. One honest conversation where you lay out exactly what you need, and I mean specifically, not generally, and see if she can meet you there. Not perform it. Actually meet you there. He paused. But if she can't, then you need to decide what this home means to you. Not the building. The life you intended to build inside it. I drove home with a clearer head than I had had in weeks. I also drove home knowing I had not yet played the card I was holding. The deed. Clifford's assessment of my legal standing. The knowledge that my position, if it ever came to that point, was stronger than anyone in my house currently understood. I was not going to use it impulsively. I was not angry in a hot way anymore. What I felt was something calmer and more deliberate. The feeling of a man who has measured the ground he is standing on and found it solid. But I was also paying very close attention now. And what I was about to discover over the next 2 weeks would strip away everything I had been hoping to find. Sometimes the truth does not arrive because you went looking for it. Sometimes it walks straight through your front door while you're standing in the hallway. It was a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the housewarming. I came home early from work. A site meeting had wrapped up an hour ahead of schedule, which almost never happened. I came in through the back door from the garage, so no one heard me arrive. The voices were coming from the kitchen. Patricia's voice first, low and pleased. I'm telling you, this place is perfect. For bedrooms, that yard. You know what this could be, right? Then Gerald. If we play this right, we could be here for good. He's not going to kick out his in-laws. Especially not with Emily on our side. My hand rested on the doorframe. I did not move. Emily's voice, quieter. Mama, I already told you. I set it up like we talked. They won't ever know how long we actually planned for this. Patricia, good girl. You know your daddy, and I can't go back to renting at our age. This is family. This is how family takes care of each other. Gerald, and Eric is going to come around. He just needs time. He's a reasonable man. Patricia, with a small laugh. He doesn't have much of a choice. I stood in that hallway for 30 seconds without breathing. Then I walked quietly back through the garage and sat in my truck in the driveway with both hands on the steering wheel. They had planned this, not as a last resort in a housing crisis. As a strategy, Patricia and Gerald had identified my home as their solution and had worked with Emily, my wife, the person sleeping in my bed, to engineer a situation where I would feel too guilty or too outnumbered to say no. The 6 weeks of silence. The housewarming as the chosen moment, in front of guests, where making a scene would cost me. The way Emily had framed it as forgetting. The way she had immediately gone to "you knew I would say no," as if that was a reasonable explanation. She had not forgotten. She had planned. I sat in that truck for 45 minutes. I replayed the conversation I had overheard 3 times, making sure I had heard what I heard. I was not misreading it. I was not filling in gaps. I had heard my wife say the words. I set it up like we talked. When I finally got out of the truck and walked back through the front door, I was completely calm. Not the calm of someone who had made peace with something. The calm of a man who has finished being confused and has entered the clear, still water on the other side of a decision. Eric, Emily said warmly when I came in. I didn't hear you come home. You hungry? Not right now, I said. I need to make some calls. I went upstairs. I called Clifford first. I told him what I had heard. Not emotionally, just factually, and I asked him what my legal options were, step by step. He told me. I called Aunt Vera next. She listened without a word until I finished. Baby, she said. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry yet, I said. I'm not done. What are you going to do? I'm going to do this right, I said. Quietly, carefully, and completely. A man who has been deceived does not have to be defeated. He just has to be smarter than the deception. Over the next 10 days, I moved in 3 directions at once. The first direction was legal. I met with Clifford in person at his office, a quiet space on the 14th floor downtown with a view of the city I had helped build piece by piece over the last decade. He walked me through the complete picture with the kind of unhurried thoroughness I had always appreciated in him. No filler, no reassurance he could not back up, just the facts arranged so I could see them clearly. Because the house was titled solely in my name, Gerald and Patricia had no legal standing as residents. They had not paid rent, signed any agreement, or established tenancy in any legally recognized way. They were guests who had stayed beyond what a reasonable host would allow, and under the law, that distinction mattered enormously. Clifford drafted a formal notice to vacate, not to serve immediately, but to have prepared, folded in a folder, waiting for the moment I decided the time had come. The moment you serve this, he said, they have 30 days to vacate the property. If they have not left at the end of 30 days, we file for unlawful occupancy and the court handles the rest. He also noted that I was entitled to change the locks at any point, since they were not paying tenants with any formal agreement establishing their right to a key. He looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "You are on very solid ground here, Eric. More solid than you may realize." I left his office feeling something I had not felt since the night of the party: steady. The second direction was financial. This one required more delicacy, because I was not looking to take anything that was not mine. That has never been my character, and I was not about to let a crisis change it. But I needed to understand the complete financial picture of my household as it was currently operating. I pulled 3 months of statements from our joint account, the one Emily and I used for household expenses. What I found was not dramatic, but it was telling. Grocery runs had increased by nearly 40% in the weeks since Gerald and Patricia moved in. There was a charge at a home goods store I had not been consulted about. 2 ATM withdrawals in amounts that Emily had not mentioned. Again, not large amounts. But the pattern they formed was the picture of someone making financial decisions about our shared household money on behalf of people I had not agreed to support. I made an appointment with my own financial advisor, separated my direct deposit to a personal account I opened independently, and made sure the joint account was not being used for anything I had not explicitly approved going forward. I did not drain the joint account. I did not move money that was not mine. What I did was stop funding an arrangement I had never consented to. The third direction was personal, and it was the hardest. I called my mother on a Wednesday evening. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does, like she has been half expecting me. I told her everything. Not the managed version, not the version I would give to someone I was trying to protect, but the full, unedited truth. The truck, the 6 weeks, the 2 months, the conversation in the hallway, the attorney, all of it. She listened from beginning to end without a single interruption. My mother has always understood that the gift of complete listening is the most serious form of love. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "Eric," she said, "do you still love her?" It was the question I had been carrying without putting into words, and hearing it out loud did something complicated in my chest. "I love who I thought she was," I said. "I'm not sure I fully know the woman who sat down with her parents and planned this." My mother was quiet again for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had the weight of someone who has earned what she knows through years of living it. "Sometimes the people we love are exactly who they have always been," she said. "And we spend years loving the version of them we hoped they were going to grow into. That is not a failure of yours, baby. That is just one of the harder things love asks you to see." I held that for a long time after we hung up. I also spoke to Jacob, whose position had shifted over the past several weeks from supportive brother to clear-eyed advisor. He was no longer in the business of being diplomatic about what was happening. "I love Emily," he told me. "But what she did was not an accident, and it was not a mistake, and I think somewhere inside you, you know that. So what do you actually need from me?" "I need you available on a specific day," I said. "I'll text you when." "I'll be there," he said. "No questions. No conditions." At the end of the 10 days, I was ready. I had the notice to vacate in a manila folder inside my briefcase. I had spoken to a family attorney, separate from Clifford, to understand my options regarding my marriage, and I had a clear understanding of where I stood and what paths were available to me if it came to that. I had Jacob on standby. I had Aunt Vera's phone number dialed into my favorites. I had a conversation prepared, not a performance, not a monologue designed to devastate, but a clear and direct accounting of the truth that I intended to speak out loud, in my own house, in my own voice, without cruelty and without flinching. But before I did any of that, there was one more thing I needed to do. For myself. I got out a notebook, the kind with the hard cover, the one I use for sketching building plans when I am working through a design problem, and I sat at the small desk in our bedroom on a Thursday night while Emily was downstairs and I wrote. Not a plan, not a list of grievances. I wrote about the last 4 years. All of it, not just the damage. I wrote about the cookout and Emily's laugh and the clip that kept almost falling from her hair. I wrote about the first time she made me dinner in her small apartment and apologized because the chicken was slightly overcooked, and I told her it was the best thing I had ever eaten and meant every word. I wrote about our wedding day, the small ceremony with people we loved surrounding us, and the way she had looked at me when we said our vows, like she was telling me something she did not have words for yet. I wrote about the morning we got the keys to this house, and she stood on the back porch with her face tilted toward the sky, like she was accepting something she had been waiting for. I wrote about Sunday mornings that had been exactly what she described they would be. I wrote about the bed frame and Jacob's useless instructions, and both of us laughing until we could not breathe. I wrote about all of the love, and then I wrote about the hallway. I needed to give the full truth to myself before I gave it to anyone else. I needed to let it all exist on the same page, the beauty and the betrayal, because both were real, and collapsing one to manage the other would only make me smaller. When I closed the notebook, I sat quietly for a few minutes in the dark of the room. Then I stood up, squared my shoulders, and went to find the folder with the notice to vacate. It was time to speak. You cannot begin what you actually want until you are completely honest about what you will not accept. I chose a Sunday morning. Not for drama, because Sundays in our house were typically slow and quiet, the kind of morning when people were present and unhurried. No work to rush to. No distractions coming in from outside. Just the house, and the people in it, and the truth that had been building for months. I woke up at 6, showered, dressed, and went downstairs before anyone else was moving. I made coffee. I set out cups. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. Gerald came down at 7:30 in his house slippers, surprised to see me sitting there. "Morning," he said, heading for the coffee pot. "Gerald," I said, "I need you and Patricia downstairs in 30 minutes. I need Emily too. I have something to say, and I'd like to say it once." He turned and looked at me. Something in my tone gave him pause. I was not aggressive, but I was not asking. "Everything all right?" 30 minutes, I said. I texted Jacob, "Today. Come at 9. He replied immediately with a single word, "There?" By 8 o'clock, all 4 of us were in the living room. Gerald and Patricia on the sofa. Emily in the armchair. Not my armchair, the smaller one near the window. Me, standing. I had decided to stand. I want to start by saying I have not done this. I began. To embarrass anyone or to create a scene. I'm doing this because I believe everyone in this room deserves honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Patricia started to say something. I held up one hand, gently but clearly. "I came home early on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago," I said. "I came in through the garage. None of you heard me." I paused. I heard a conversation in the kitchen. The room changed temperature. Emily's face shifted first, a quick, involuntary movement, the look of someone who has just heard a door close on a plan they thought was still running. Patricia's expression went very still. Gerald set down his coffee mug. I heard Patricia say this house was perfect and that if handled right, we could be here for good, I said. I heard Gerald agree. And I heard Emily say, I looked at my wife, that she had set things up the way they talked, and that no one would know how long they had actually planned for this. Emily closed her eyes. I let the silence sit for a moment. "I didn't come in that night," I said. "I went back to my truck, because I needed to be sure about what I heard before I did anything. And I am sure." Gerald leaned forward. "Now, Eric, I know how that sounds." "Gerald," I kept my voice even. "I'm not angry. I passed through angry a while ago. What I am is clear." I turned back to Emily. "I love you. I want that on record, because I need you to know that everything I'm about to say comes from that place, not from hatred." She opened her eyes. They were wet. "You knew for 2 months," I said. "You let me plan this party. You let me paint and build and invite people and stand on this porch proud of what I had done. And you were holding this the entire time. Not because you forgot, because you and your parents decided that the best way to get what they wanted was to present it as already done. I took a breath. That was a betrayal, Emily. Not a mistake. A choice that was made over and over again for 2 months. Eric, she started. Let me finish. Not harsh. Steady. This house is titled solely in my name. I confirmed that with my attorney. Gerald and Patricia have no legal standing here as residents. I have a formal notice to vacate prepared. I pulled the folder from beside the chair where I had set it the night before and placed it on the coffee table. I am not serving it today, but I am asking, clearly and directly, as the owner of this property, that Gerald and Patricia begin making arrangements to find a home of their own. I am giving them 60 days. Patricia's composure cracked. You cannot be serious. We are family. With respect, Patricia, family does not scheme to occupy someone's home without their knowledge. What happened here was not family. It was a plan. Gerald stood up. His voice rose slightly. Boy, you are out of line. This is your wife's family you're talking to. Gerald, I said, quiet and firm. I need you to sit back down. Because I am talking to you in your chair, in your living room, and I am speaking to you with more grace than you showed me when you invited strangers into my home without asking, or when you moved into this house without my knowledge or consent. So please, sit down and listen. He sat. I looked at Emily last. She was crying now, silently, in the chair by the window, and I felt the grief of it move through me like a wave. I want to save our marriage, I said. I believe that is possible, but it is only possible if you and I start from the truth. All of it. Not the managed version. Not the version where I find out things 3 weeks late or in a hallway I wasn't supposed to be in. I sat down then, finally, across from her. If you want to fight for us, for real, with a counselor, with everything on the table, I am willing to do that. But your parents need to find their own home. That is not negotiable. The room was completely quiet. Jacob arrived at 9 exactly. I let him in. He nodded at me and stood in the doorway with his arms folded, not saying a word, just present. Because that is what brothers are for. Patricia started to argue again. Emily told her quietly to stop. And then, for the first time in all of this, Emily said something without managing it, without calculating it, without thinking about how it would land. I'm sorry, Eric, she said. Her voice was broken open. I am so sorry. It did not fix everything. Nothing in that moment could fix everything. But it was the first real thing she had said in months. And it mattered. The first house you build is made of wood and brick. The second is made of everything you learned the first time. Gerald and Patricia moved out in 51 days. Not 60, 51, because once it was clear that the legal foundation was what it was, and once Gerald's brother in Decatur offered them the use of a small house he owned, the timeline accelerated. Patricia was cold to me until the day the last box left. Gerald shook my hand on the way out, said nothing that amounted to an apology, but there was something in his face that looked like a man who had looked at himself clearly for the first time in a while and did not entirely like what he saw. I do not hold it against them. Not in the way that eats at you. They did what people do when fear and need combine into something they have not learned to manage honestly. It still was not right, but I had no energy left for contempt. The marriage took longer. Emily and I started seeing a counselor 3 weeks after that Sunday morning conversation. A woman named Dr. Angela Robinson, who had an office downtown and a way of asking questions that made it impossible to hide inside comfortable answers. The first 3 sessions were some of the most painful of my adult life. Emily had to say things out loud that she had been protecting herself from for years. I had to hear them and also say my own truths, the places I had been willfully blind, the times I had dismissed the quiet signals because I preferred the comfort of the story I was telling myself. It was not a quick process. Recovery never is. But something was happening. Slowly, with setbacks and hard evenings, and more than a few nights when we sat in silence on opposite sides of the bed wondering if we were going to be okay. Something was happening. Emily began to change in the way that is the only kind of change that actually counts, from the inside. She started recognizing when she was managing me instead of talking to me. She started saying things before they were already decided instead of after. Once, about 2 months into counseling, she came to me on a Thursday evening and said, I need to talk to you about something before I do anything about it. It was something small, a financial decision, nothing major. But the way she said it, and the fact that she was saying it at all, made me have to look away for a second because I did not want her to see how much that meant to me. I also worked on my own things. I had to acknowledge that I had known something was off and chosen comfort over clarity. Not blaming myself for what Emily and her parents did, but owning the places where I had let things slide because asking the hard question felt like risking the peace. I did not want to do that anymore. Peace that rests on something avoided is not really peace. It is just postponed difficulty. My mother came to dinner about 4 months after that Sunday. It was the first time she had been back to the house since the housewarming. I cooked smothered pork chops, rice, green beans from a recipe she had taught me years ago. Jacob came too. We sat at the dining room table, just the 4 of us, and it felt like something had been restored to its original shape. After dinner, when Jacob and Emily were in the kitchen doing dishes together, a thing that would have felt impossible 6 months earlier, my mother sat across from me in the living room and looked at me with that quiet expression she has when she is seeing something clearly. "You did good," she said. "Not just with the house. With all of it." "I almost didn't," I said. "But you did." She reached over and covered my hand with hers. "You told the truth when it would have been easier not to. That matters." I looked around the room. My living room. The warm gray walls. The furniture Emily and I had argued about warmly on a Saturday afternoon. The back porch visible through the glass. The yard beyond it going gold in the evening light. "I almost lost this," I said. "And I did not just mean the house." "But you didn't," she said. "The thing about building a life is that it does not happen once. You build it the first time with your hands, with savings and labor and sacrifice and the sheer determination to have something no one can take from you. And then, if life tests you the way it tested me, you have to build it a second time, from the inside out, with the material that is much harder to work with than wood or brick. Truth. Boundaries. The courage to say clearly what you will and will not accept, even to the person you love most. The willingness to stay and fight for something real instead of something comfortable. The understanding that love, at its best, is not the absence of difficulty. It is 2 people deciding, every single day, to bring their whole honest self to the table. Emily and I are still a work in progress. I believe we will be for a long time. But we are doing the work, together, with our eyes open. That is more than I can say for a lot of relationships that look fine from the outside. The house on Fairview Lane is ours. Really ours now, not just legally, but in the way that means something deeper. Every room has a story. Some of them are hard stories. But hard stories, honestly told, are how a place becomes a home. Last Sunday morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when Emily came in, still half asleep, hair loose around her shoulders, and she leaned against the counter beside me the way she used to in the early days, before all of it. She looked out the window at the backyard. "I love this house," she said quietly. I handed her the first cup of coffee. "Me too," I said, and I meant it more than I ever had. The moving truck that pulled into my driveway on a May evening almost cost me everything. It cost me comfort, certainty, and the version of my marriage I had been choosing to believe in. But what came out the other side? The house I live in now, the marriage I am actually in, the man I have become through all of it, is built on something that no one can put in a truck and take away. Real foundations hold. You just have to be willing to find out what yours are made of. What lesson did you take away from today's story? Share it in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe.